Howdy, y'all. Asha Hawksworth here with a special episode of Redneck Lesbian featuring an interview with Chrissy Stroop, an ex-vangelical writer and advocate who will discuss the evangelical world and her own coming out process and transition. But first, let's discuss gender in the redneck world. One year for Halloween, I and my boyfriend at the time decided to cross-dress for a party. He wore a dress, heels, makeup, and hairspray. I slicked my hair back, colored it black, created a 5 o'clock shadow with some mascara, and donned a suit and tie. We did a really good job. So good, in fact, that it made a lot of people really uncomfortable. One guy looked at me with a sour expression and said, "You look like a guy." Well, congratulations, Sherlock. That was indeed the point of my costume. Most people identify with their physical bodies and assume that their body defines who they are. Because of our body, we think that we are white, black, Native American, Hispanic, or any other ethnicity you can name. Or we think that we are male or female. Or we believe that we are beautiful or ugly, disabled or not, sick or healthy, weak or strong. In short, we have limited ourselves by the boundaries of what is just a vehicle to experience the world with. According to science, most people have 2 chromosomes, but some people have 3, 4, or even 5 chromosomes. While some combinations result in rare disorders, a person can go their whole life and not know that they are genetically XXY or XXX, for example. Gender is not straightforward. Intersex people have always walked among us, born with both male and female physical characteristics. When this occurs in industrialized societies, corrections are usually made surgically, with doctors essentially choosing which gender the person will identify as, at least outwardly. As a result, some intersex adults are unhappy with their assigned gender and choose to change it in later life. This isn't the same as gender dysphoria, which is what occurs in transgender people. They are born with a body of one sex, but they identify as the other. And as you might expect, this gets a lot of rednecks really hot and bothered. While reality isn't black and white, the redneck world surely is. You are your dick or your vagina, as the case may be. The Lord hath given you those genitals, and that's that. And you can see how their ego really needs to hang on to this, because if the white male body were suddenly irrelevant, it's crisis time. They have so much invested in their whiteness and maleness that it all has to mean they're special. The idea of a white man rejecting his maleness for a female identity is more than their Confederate flag-soaked minds can deal with. But if we're honest with ourselves, we all have varying degrees of masculine and feminine traits that have nothing to do with what's between our legs. My daddy definitely wanted a boy, and when he ended up with me and only me, he adjusted. I learned how to hunt, skin rabbits, and grew up essentially as a tomboy. My best friends in school were all guys, except for the one girlfriend who was essentially my girlfriend, if you get my drift, although we were both in big-time denial about that. After a while, I realized that my dad hadn't made me a tomboy. I just was a tomboy. It wasn't until I reached my 20s that I realized that my entire worldview was a masculine one. I saw myself as an equal to men, and more than that, I sort of saw myself as a man. Masculinity was my comfort zone. I think this explains why I scared away so many would-be male suitors over the years. When I came of age in the 80s, there was no talk about transgender people or non-binary people, none of that. Rednecks understood about gays and everybody else. That was pretty much it. So it's been interesting to see the terminology evolve to include more of the gray areas of gender. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I would have called myself any of those. Transmasculine? Yeah, I think that applies. Non-binary? That too. I have even wondered on occasion if I would be happier in a male body. And the answer is, I'm not sure. I've spent 51 years in this one and I don't feel compelled to change, so probably not. But it's something I can certainly empathize with. The other day we watched The Crying Game with our kids. When the big reveal arrived, you know the one, both of my kids said, I knew it. I was impressed. When I saw this in 1992, I didn't know it. I was surprised. But times have changed, and transgender people are more visible now, so it wasn't even a thing to my teenagers. And that is progress. Of course, progress feels like it comes with a step forward and two steps back, and we're still dealing with a lot of homophobia and transphobia these days. I mean, J.K. Rowling, what the fuck? You shooting for the Redneck Asshole Award of the Year? I gotta warn you though, there's a lot of competition for that. Anyway, IBM finally apologized for firing a woman 52 years ago because she was transgender. And on the other, Trump cultist Jenna Ellis intentionally misgendered the Pennsylvania Secretary of Health, which shows she is vying for the top prize in the Redneck Passive Aggressive Championships. We've all been there. When I married my wife, we changed our names. My mother doggedly persisted in using my old name. My cousin went a step further by using a name I have never used, which included my ex-husband's surname. And of course, every homophobe in the family, which is to say all of them, persist in referring to my wife as my partner, as if wishing could erase our marriage. So none of this is unusual to the LGBTQ community, but that doesn't mean we aren't sick of this bullshit. Unfortunately for rednecks, though, their communities have gay, lesbian, and transgender people in them. That boy in high school I thought might be gay, oh yeah, he is, and living outside the United States at this point. My old girlfriend from middle school, stuck in an abusive marriage with an asshole who greeted her pregnancy announcement with a vasectomy. Who knows how many miserable people remain closeted in redneck America? It's not always a safe place to be yourself. Just ask Matthew Shepard. Today I am talking with Chrissy Stroop, an ex-evangelical writer and advocate and co-editor of the essay collection Empty the Pews, Stories of Leaving the Church. She holds a PhD in modern Russian history from Stanford and is also a senior correspondent for Religion Dispatches and a regular contributor to The Conversationalists. Her work has appeared in Dame Magazine, Foreign Policy, The Boston Globe, Playboy, Political Research Associates, and other outlets, including peer-reviewed academic journals. Much of Stroop's work focuses on exposing conservative Christianity as an anti-pluralist threat to democracy. Welcome, Chrissy. That is quite the resume. Better than mine.
I've had a weird life, but thank you for having me on the show.
You know, I really am pleased to have you here because I've been following you for a while, and one of the things that hit me right away is like, oh my God, you get it. Because you grew up in the culture and you get it. And, you know, my wife is from New England and all her friends are, you know, she went to boarding school and, you know, stuff like that, private school. Yeah, no kidding. And so all of these liberal friends are like,
I went to private school too, where we learned young earth creationism and said the pledge to the American flag, the Christian flag, and the Bible every morning. But hey, it was private school.
Right. That's a little different. Hers was like what do you call it? Episcopal kind of thing. But
yeah. No, I know it's different. I'm just being snarky.
No, that's real. And the thing that I have always kind of run up against, at least until fairly recently, is I would tell all my liberal friends, no, you don't get it. Gilead is like their dream. And they're like, no, that's hyperbole. It's like,
yeah, not much. I mean, the thing about, you know, this kind of like toxic authoritarian subculture, you know, authoritarian Christianity, is that the dynamic is such that the people who are more extreme end up with more moral authority, right? So if they were to take over, you know, the people who would go full Gilead would be enabled by the people who were like, oh, I don't think we should actually stone gay people, you know.
But they would enable it.
Yes, they would enable it, and the extremists would, you know, be able to take over. That's how I think it would play out anyway. I mean, yeah, they want. I mean, even this whole spectrum is bad, right? It's from, you know, let's literally hang gay people white supremacist patriarchy to, oh, let's just make their existence illegal, but let's not actually, kill them. Unless maybe we make, buggery a capital crime or something, but
Which
not
they
that
probably
Americans
would.
say buggery, but
Right.
yeah, it's a fun word.
Well, these kinds of things never get less extreme as they go on.
Yeah. So, you start from that kind of theology that they have that places men on top of women, and, places absolute authority in the patriarch over the family, and they want to devolve government to the point where there's no challenge to that authority, there's no protections for children's rights. Yeah, it always redounds to the biggest extreme. Eventually, it protects enables the most horrific abuses.
Why don't you explain about your background and how how you grew up a little bit, because it sounds like fiction to so many people. It's like, no, that can't be.
I know. And it's so annoying, right? Which is why, it's been so important on Twitter over the last few years and other online spaces. And increasingly, I think sometimes people are meeting outside the internet and the real world too to talk about these things, because a lot of people just don't get it. And I didn't even have the worst of it by far. And yet people still find it unbelievable, right? So, my parents they weren't as strict as some. And so while we got the whole, awful ideology, they were just like, they would let my sister and me do community theater and stuff. So they didn't totally ban secular music. They didn't control my reading that much. So I always had kind of a window outside, but still pretty much for most of my childhood, my entire social world was other evangelical Christians like Gus, right? And very few people of color. I mean, this is also Indiana and living in the suburbs of Indianapolis. So that's already, a very white kind of situation. But then in the Christian school, at that time, it was hardly integrated at all. Maybe 1 to 2, maybe 3 kids of color per graduating class, which could be anywhere from 60, 70 up to like 90 people. And so church and Christian school, that was pretty much our entire social world. In Christian school and elementary school, the days literally began with 3 pledges. The pledge to the American flag, followed by the Christian flag, and the Bible. So the pledge to the Christian flag ends with Jesus Christ coming back with life and liberty for all who believe, right? Not for everyone, for all who believe. So you have this very kind of creepy authoritarian Christian nationalist dynamic going on. We also had talent shows at the Christian school, and they would literally end with a sing-along of the performers in the audience of Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA.
Oh, God, help me. I had some of that.
I hate that song.
You
know where else I heard that? Just real, quick as a little aside. I was with my parents in Florida. I lived in Tampa, Florida from 2015 to 2018. And we went to see the famous mermaid performers of Weeki Wachee, which is like this little place in Podunk, Florida. And it's like a little tiny theme park. And women who actually have to, be very athletic to do this. I mean, they have an apparatus for breathing underwater, but they swim in these mermaid tails. They perform. People can get their pictures taken with them. It's a big thing. But anyway, so they sometimes do like versions of fairy tales under the water. And like you're in this sort of auditorium with glass, and you're looking at this sort of deep water kind of cave, I guess, where they're doing the performance. And anyway, it ended with God Bless the USA. And the mermaids unfurled this giant underwater American flag, which of course violates flag protocol. But I was just like, seriously. But it's one of these, 1960s roadside attractions that survived, and it's kind of something else.
That sounds.
It has nothing to do with my. Well, it has a little bit to do with my childhood, but anyway.
So why do you think, because this is something I've kind of been coming as, is there any way to change this? Why do you think evangelicals are so resistant to social changes and accepting differences? And
Yeah, I mean, I think that honestly, any kind of fundamentalism and evangelicalism is a kind of fundamentalism, uh, is a place that is defined by people's authoritarian psychology. It's kind of the social embodiment of a cycle of abuse. It's full of traumatized people perpetuating cycles in which they traumatize other people. So extreme religion like this, what we might call a high control religious group, or people who are less careful about their terminology and don't care what scholars think, tend to call them cults. And I don't really police that terminology if other people want to use the language of cult, but cult to me is sort of, it's a religion that I don't like. Right? I don't like lots of religions. Other religions I'm perfectly fine with, I mean, that sounded bad. Like, I'm fine with most Christians, most Muslims, most Jews, most Buddhists, right? Most of these world religions, most people in them are fine, peaceful, capable of coexisting with pluralism and democracy. But others want to use their religions for social control. That is the sign of a very unhealthy person. Narcissists and abusers and other kinds of predators thrive in these environments. But people get pulled in because they're vulnerable. So either you are simply socialized and indoctrinated into this as a child, or if you are an adult convert, almost invariably you are hitting rock bottom, or you're suffering some serious life crisis, and that's when you think, oh, I could go back to church for help. And the extreme Christians are there to reach out, love bomb you, which is a technique of starting to control people, right? You show them all kinds of love and kindness first before you start to make sure that if they're going to stay in your club, and at this point they're probably dependent on your club, they have to accept that women can never have authority over men, that wives have to submit to their husbands, that they need to make sure to do everything they can to oppose LGBTQ rights and to ban abortion. They just surround you with this ideology, and when you're in the club, and particularly in a place like America where we just don't have adequate social services provided by the state, oh, what else are you going to do? Where else are you going to get free childcare or affordable childcare? You can't afford to send your kids to summer camp? Hey, VBS will be there for you,
it's so true. It's like those spiders that live in the ground, and it's like they'll just come out and grab you, and once they've got you, they just really suck you in.
It's maybe even more like those like fake fireflies. How like fireflies are like flashing their lights because they want to mate, right? And the funny thing about fireflies is there's like way more males than females, because nature is ridiculous and mean sometimes, and funny and weird. So, the male fireflies are up here going flash, 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 and they're looking for corresponding flashes down in the grass from the female fireflies, right? Well, there's these other species that have mimicked that species flash, and they'll flash, and then the male firefly will come down and get eaten.
Genius.
Well, sorry, yeah. I liked nature shows a lot as a kid.
No, that's a great analogy. They have this idea, the evangelicals, of that normal people, good people, look this one way, and because of that, it certainly took me a long time to realize that I was a lesbian. I was like, why are lesbians hitting on me? Go away. Well, they saw something I did not, and so it seems like it takes longer if you've come from that culture to kind of wrap your head around the idea, the horrible, what would be to you a horrible idea of being gay or trans, right, or whatever it is. And how did that work for you?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, obviously different people have different experiences, and some people know from pretty early on, but I've talked to and heard about a lot of people who didn't, and who don't, and simply didn't have the mental toolkit or to understand their identity, or they repressed a lot of things kind of to protect themselves, probably maybe even, from the self-knowledge that would cause them to experience even more harm in this environment. Because queer people are simply not supposed to exist. To the extent that they talk about, homosexuality, it's, that, well, it's a choice, right? And then some of them have kind of like realized, okay, people don't actually choose this, so they pretend they're a little bit more humane. They're like, well, all right, so some people are gay, but God just calls them to be celibate. It's like a special thing. You have to be celibate. And, you know, if you want to rock the boat at all, you're going to lose all your social support. If these are the networks in which you grew up, or, you know, in which you've been isolated after a life crisis, a divorce, a serious death in the family, or an addict or whatever, you know, they reel you in and then they become your social support system. They will withdraw that support system at the drop of a hat. And some people call it holy ghosting. Like, you know, you change your opinion about complementarianism versus egalitarianism, which for people who may not know, you know, complementarianism refers to the idea that God created men and women for different roles, right? And so the man has to be the head of the household, has to be the head of his wife, the wife has to submit. And egalitarianism is where they say, no, marriage doesn't have to work like that, which is not the popular position with evangelical Christians, by the way. So, you know, if you go to a church that's complementarian and you're like, you know, my spouse and I don't want to be complementarian anymore, we think it's bad. Goodbye small group, goodbye social support system, you know. Yeah, I mean, there is no space to be different at all. So in my Christian school growing up, you know, and just in this environment that I was surrounded with, I always just kind of felt off and different. And I could not put my finger on how exactly. I didn't have the experience of some trans kids where I knew I wanted to be, and I'm just going to use simplified language here, quote unquote, the opposite sex, right? Or I knew I was a girl. I did, you know, make friends with boys and girls, but I just always kind of felt different and socially awkward. And then later, like in high school, you know, I would get teased about not really being masculine, or like fitting masculine stereotypes. And I mean, there was one popular boy that he just loved to tease me because I liked Alanis Morissette so much when I was a teenager. And I just didn't understand what could possibly be wrong with a boy liking an angry girl rocker who sings about how horrible men are, you know?
Right.
It just did not compute for me why this would be something that he got such a kick out of. But, you know, if I were pressed on it, I would just say, well, I'm comfortable in my masculinity. And that basically just meant exactly one thing, you know. It meant I like girls, which was like your fallback option. So you can show like, okay, see, I like girls, so I'm straight. And, you know, I always have been, since as far back as I can remember, being attracted to people, been attracted to girls and women. I later also in my 30s discovered that I can also be attracted to men, which I think I had kind of inklings of before, because I wouldn't like have a problem with like rating hotness or whatever, you know, including of men, but be like, oh yeah, that actor is a lot cuter than that one, or whatever. It's just a casual conversation with a friend. But, you know, I didn't think I might actually, you know, want to be with a man. And now I still don't for the most part, but for other reasons, right? Because men are, you know, so deeply enculturated in patriarchy, and it bothers me. But I could be with a man. I've still mostly been attracted to women, and a lot of trans women who are in that position, who like are lesbian or lean lesbian, do take longer to figure it out for that reason too. But evangelicalism also had a lot to do with it, I think. I'm sure that it had a lot to do with me not just really, you know, listening to the part of me that, you know, could also be attracted to boys. So I also just had a lot of female friends in high school, and we would just go out to coffee shops and stuff, and we weren't dating, and everyone thought that was so weird because you're not supposed to do that in that environment, right? And I'm just like, why? It doesn't make sense to me. And the kind of older I got, and the more I deconstructed, and the more I kind of came into my own, you know, the more that I found myself, even before I understood much of this, you know, interested in women's studies and feminism and women's and gender history and that sort of thing. I mean, I did my undergraduate thesis on a topic in as a history student a topic that was in women's studies, and not that boys shouldn't do that, but just it's not that typical, right? And I didn't think anything about it. I just found that I more often connected more easily with women and with queer people as soon as I was able to drop, the evangelical ideology that was forcing me even into college, which I just look back on with such embarrassment now. Also still defending young earth creationism at a state school. So embarrassing. But, that had me like, I would feel super nervous every time I met an openly queer person. Like, I think that was also probably a tell, but like, I was like also like intrigued and fascinated by them. But if it came to it, I had to still say like, okay, I think it's a sin, but that doesn't mean I want to be mean to you or anything, which is ridiculous. But so eventually, I drop all that stuff. By the time I'm 22, I know I'm not evangelical anymore. I just can't identify with that, but I'm still kind of in this protracted crisis of faith, and I don't have people to talk to about this, and in grad school, when I go there, I taught English in Russia for a year after college. Then I went to grad school. Most people around me just didn't get it. And it wasn't until I was it was after grad school, I was still kind of trying to figure out how I could relate to Christianity. I didn't think I believed much of anything, but I was kind of just really trying to stay in the club for my family and, kind of quasi-dissimulating on some things. And I didn't even know if at a certain point, if I was doing it to protect myself or to protect them. And I felt like an impossible person who shouldn't exist. I still felt really awkward, but one of the things that I learned to do as a kid was to sort of step back and intellectualize everything and live in my head. And so I didn't have this connection with my body very much that I'm working on now. But yeah, so through all that time, the friends that I got close to, most of them would be women and or queer. And so finally, after grad school, I'm actually teaching at a Russian university in Moscow. I did that from 2012 to 2015. And so I started polydating this queer Russian girl who had grown up like partly in America, partly in Russia, and was kind of back in Russia taking care of her grandfather. And I learned more about feminism and gender theory and stuff from her. But she would also just kind of tease me, and I was just a secondary partner. She had a primary partner, and I didn't have any issues with that. And we only kind of dated for a few months, but yeah, she would tease me about things that I did that she thought were like, very typical of like lesbian subculture, like the way I made eye contact or stuff like that, or just like she would always tease me like, why are all your friends lesbians? Why do you have so many lesbians who are friends? And I'm like, well, I don't know why. That's not normal. So
Must have found them all actually, that was the period of time in which things were getting kind of dicey for the queer community in Russia.
In Russia, yeah, it was. And even in downtown Moscow, like you were probably safe, but still, hard to be really open about it. So yeah, that was kind of unfortunate in some ways. I mean, to be there when I realized that I was queer, but also like America then got worse as soon as I got back. So
I know.
I mean, Russia and America are actually very similar. It's a digression, but we have large contingents of the population in both places who have this just really like stupid, jingoistic, in-your-face patriotism, and they love conspiracy theories. I mean, seriously, Russians and Americans make the best frenemies because we're really just kind of two sides of the same coin of, imperial / post-imperial inferiority complex thing that we have going on after the Cold War is over. I mean, this whole discourse of national greatness, it's like a national penis measuring contest. I mean, it's very stupid. But Russians are all about that like rah-rah patriotism too. And like in Russia, a couple of times I've been in situations like, one time my two Russian friends and an American friend and I were taking a bus out to this historic town for its annual cucumber festival, because, you know, local agricultural festivals is also a Russian thing as well as an American thing. Anyway, we had bought our bus tickets early enough that we had seats on the bus, and then people who came later had standing room only. And so we were quietly speaking English to each other. There were these Russians standing around, and I think they thought that these Americans sitting there did not understand Russian. So they were saying to each other in Russian, no, look at these foreigners taking our seats on our bus, you know, and it's like, yep, America's just like that. Or, you know, people don't like it when you're speaking a foreign language. That's happened.
No wonder the evangelicals have a love affair with Russia now. Really?
Yeah, no, exactly, because they're the same. I mean, and there are good people in Russia. I have a lot of good Russian colleagues and friends, you know. So it's not the whole people, but it's just this huge streak of, like, you know, bully style patriotism that we also have here. But yeah, so anyway, this girl and I were, she was trying to, like, sort of get me caught up on, like, certain elements of queer culture and history that I had missed out on. So, you know, we watched this documentary, Paris is Burning, about, you know, the big, what's the word I'm looking for? The balls, the gay balls in New York, like, you know, in the 80s and 90s and stuff. And we watched this great old movie from 1999 with Natasha Lyonne called But I'm a Cheerleader, which I assume you've seen that?
I have seen that.
yeah, it's pretty great. I mean, you know, being a whole spoof of the whole conversion therapy thing turned into a coming of age love story. But yeah, so at some point in the movie, the girl that I was dating, I think I turned to her and said something. She said something back. I don't even remember what it was, but what happens next really stuck in my head, right? So we make eye contact, and she just says to me, and I'm going to use a slur here, quoting her, that is not a slur to some people in the community, right, that has been reclaimed. And she says, "You are such a dyke." And I was just like, had this profound moment of realization where I was like, holy shit, that is something that I can be. I don't have to be a man. I am a dyke. That's great.
I have been called a dyke many times. And actually it's accurate. So what can I say?
so I was 33 when I had this kind of, like, you know, this epiphany that it came in that moment, but after, like, sort of having to learn that, oh yeah, gender and sexuality operate distinctly. Oh yeah, there are trans women who are more butch in their style. You know, so then you start picking away at all these barriers, and you're left with, who do I really feel myself to be? And I realized that I'd always identified with women more than men. Couldn't particularly express that or fully understand that in the subculture that I grew up in. But yeah, looking back on it, there was a pretty clear pattern. And a lot of times during gendered family activities, that I would just kind of sit it out because, you know, I wasn't exactly supposed to be with the women in the kitchen or whatever. I love cooking now. I did not enjoy laying on the sofa watching sports. And so I would disappear to some room and read.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I remember those days so well. It's gotten better, I think, because, you know, when I was in school, you were either straight or gay. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
All these labels that exist now, they were not around then. You know, you could be a lesbian, you could be gay, but, you know, transgender, what's that? Now we've got, like, binary and trans masculine and all of these terms, and it's like, wow, you know, it's great because it kind of helped me figure out where I kind of fall in the spectrum a little bit. It's nice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, breaking the binary, I think, is helpful for everybody because, you know, probably nobody really 100% fits, like, whatever this ideal type of feminine or masculine is supposed to be, right? Which is all culturally constructed anyway. So.
Absolutely.
It's a weird mix of culture and biology, and it gets a little dicey trying to sort those things out, but, you know, anyway.
Well, you talked about earlier about evangelicals being like bullies. and the Russians too, some of them. And my experience of them is that they are some of the most passive aggressive, if not outright aggressive, but passive aggressive people on earth. When you said about narcissism as part of the culture, I think that is the culture. But I've gotten so much passive aggressive stuff, dead naming. I changed my name too. And my mother just was like, gonna keep calling me by that old name until she dies, I think. And, we are married. I'm married to Anna, but everybody in the family still refers to me as her partner, or she's my partner. We're not actually, can't acknowledge the marriage. How do you, have you had some of that?
Oh yeah, no, passive aggression, yeah, it's a big part of evangelical subculture too, because, they're supposed to be nice, even though they're some of the meanest people you'll ever meet. So a lot of the times they'll be fake nice and, in vicious ways, or be vicious behind your back. Yeah, I mean, I'm in a situation right now, as far as like dead naming goes and stuff. I mean, because I see my particular journey as one of continuity rather than break, because I had this whole like body of work written under the name Christopher. I'm not that freaked out. Like, I don't freak out particularly being associated with that name, because I wrote a bunch of stuff that's published under it, and that's not going to change at this point, particularly the academic stuff. But I mean, if my name is legally changed from Christopher Allen to Christina Rhoda, and I like to go by Chrissy, and I think I like to do that in part because it's gender neutral. And I always liked going by Chris in the first place because it was also gender neutral, And there was a short time when I studied abroad, and one of the terms abroad, I spent like one term in Germany and a shorter term in England at Oxford. And I decided I was going to try to be Christopher there. I was going to like try it on, except that like everyone had already been told I was Chris anyway, so that just didn't even ever work. But I don't think it was really going to work anyway. But I was going to try it on, right? I mean, there's other times I tried to do things to like make myself more masculine, and they were very silly. Like literally like parting my hair on the opposite side of where the natural part is, because more men part their hair on the left than the right. And I was like, maybe this will help me get an academic job. So I tried to force my hair to part on the side that's not its natural part. It would make me more masculine, and maybe it would also help me get an academic job. I kind of lost my train of thought there.
That's all right.
The passive aggression, yeah, and the dead naming. So, yeah, so I would, prefer that my relatives use my name and she, her pronouns now, but most of them don't. And I'm in a particularly bad situation with my sister. We've been estranged from each other twice at this point, and now we're not estranged. We hardly ever talk, though. She really cannot see me. She cannot comprehend me because she's so afraid. And so, now that I am queer in a way that can't be hidden anymore, I'm cut off from even talking to her kids on their birthdays on the phone. I can send them presents, and then I will get thank you cards back addressed to Uncle Chris. But it feels very degrading to put up with that. But at the same time, I don't want to cut her completely out of my life. I don't think she's going to come around, but I don't know. It's complicated.
I know a lot of people who are older couples and things like that, older queer people who have, that's just the life experiences that they get cut off from, particularly children, nieces and nephews, things like that. And now it seems like it's a little bit better, but certainly in the evangelical community, it's just like they just run screaming into the woods.
Yeah, they're just so afraid of difference, of the slightest change. And, even though it's bad for a lot of people, and I think deep down a lot of them know it, because behind the scenes, they know that all kinds of abuses are going on. They know how common child molestation is in their churches and their families. But, you know, they're told that us evil liberals paid by George Soros, oh, by the way, the Russians pioneered the George Soros conspiracy theories.
I'm
But,
not surprised.
you know, that we have this international cabal of pedophiles, like we're all pedophiles. Only Jesus allows them to sometimes not be pedophiles, right? So they're way safer just kind of like keeping it all under the rug and never going against the family than they are with the evil liberals like us out here.
Well, and I guess old habits die hard, because you're part of what we call the ex-vangelical community. You're no longer part of that, but some of the traits kind of live on, because when you were outed, that actually came from the ex-vangelicals, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would definitely still say that there's sort of a broad and diffuse community and movement that I'm still a part of. I rarely use the hashtag ex-evangelical anymore. And I mean, so I want to be careful not to accuse people of doing more than they actually did. But so technically I outed myself to try to protect myself and this kind of like supportive community we had built on Twitter that was just being torn apart by the smear campaign against me that was organized by a few people, chiefly Sam Fields and Eve, formerly known as Hannah Ettinger, and Karen Darkwater. They just they got some people together to sign a statement. They called themselves the Magdalene Collective, you know, or Maudlin if you're British, but anyway. And they wrote a very transphobic statement. Speaking of evangelical passive aggression, it was so clearly directed at me, though they did not mention my name. But everyone who knew, like, the context of this would understand that this was directed at me. And I really think it mostly came from a place of envy that because of my particularly weird background, my particular set of circumstances and academic expertise and lived experience, I'd sort of become a relatively, but not hugely, prominent Twitter personality, right? I mean, back then I probably had, I don't know, 16,000, 20,000 followers. Now I have 55,000, which is still like small for a big account or big for a small account, you know? But on ex-vangelical Twitter, nobody else has those numbers. I didn't do that on purpose. Yes, was I trying to do some good by, you know, trying to have a career as a public intellectual speaking to these issues? Sure, but I was always trying to uplift and highlight other people's voices. I think I retweet and quote tweet a lot more than, you know, most comparable verified Twitter accounts. And I was promoting their stuff all the time, but somehow they told themselves in their heads that I was just doing that all for my own self-interest somehow. I mean, some people even started calling me a cult leader. And they went full Darvo. And a lot of people believed them. Like, you know, so I came out as trans fully before I was ready. Yeah, I had discussed, you know, being, you know, not entirely cis or whatever, a little bit on podcasts that my relatives were never in a million years going to listen to and that most people weren't going to listen to. But I wasn't really out, right? Because these were community podcasts that I just didn't, and I didn't fully identify as a woman in those podcasts anyway. So I did, and it did cause fallout in my family because I wanted to, okay, so this was in the context of I was teaching at the University of South Florida for 3 years, right? And then I was a postdoc and then a visiting instructor, a PhD in modern Russian history from Stanford. And then I just kind of ran out of steam on the academic job market. Nothing more for me at the University of South Florida, nothing permanent, could not find a tenure track job in the field. This was after coming back from teaching in Russia for 3 years, where I never wanted to stay forever anyway, but particularly as Russia was cracking down more on queer people and just getting more authoritarian, annexing Crimea and all of that, making things unstable. I wanted to get out of there, go back to America. Well, I would have been happy to stay in Western Europe where they have normal social safety nets, but that wasn't going to happen. I mean, there weren't the jobs. So I got a chance to go back to America with a good job, but it wasn't a permanent job. And so I then had to go back to Indiana and live with my parents So this is not the safest situation in which to come out,
Right.
trying to reinvent myself for a year, see if I could make it as a writer before maybe trying to go into the think tank and advocacy, human rights advocacy world or something like that if I wasn't making it as a writer. And as it is, I kind of do both those things, but independently. So I am lucky enough to be able to be making it right now, largely through Patreon support. And I do write commentary and journalism, but I also write policy research for think tanks like Political Research Associates. So yeah, I was living with my parents, and I knew it wouldn't be the worst situation. I also knew my mom would not take this well. I'd already come out to my mom as queer, which has caused one big freak out with her, but I didn't come out as trans, right? And I was trying to kind of hint, but she was not getting it. And meanwhile, I'm lucky in as much as I was able to feel out my dad on a lot of things over the years, and he kind of deconstructed a lot of things, and also through a weird set of circumstances, like passive aggressively basically being forced out of the Evangelical church where he was a music pastor. He had to go on the job market just a couple of years before he would get full Social Security benefits, which was like a huge stressor and dangerous, but it's because the Evangelical church fucked him over. And he ended up becoming the music pastor at an LGBTQ affirming ELCA Lutheran church. So that's great. My dad is now a music pastor in a mainline church that is affirming, which he now also totally thinks it's a much better fit for him. But my mom still teaches at the Christian school I graduated from. Pretty sure she's not affirming. She has, at this point, learned to mostly respect my boundaries, and we are able to maintain a relationship, which a lot of people aren't lucky enough to do. But it can still be a little tricky sometimes. And I'm sure that if she were affirming, she could not say that out loud or she would lose her job, and she cannot afford to retire at this point. So yeah, this was bad, but they were basically accusing me of being just another white man talking over everybody else, weaponizing social justice language in an unfair way. But the statement was also full of transphobic language. It basically took the language of AMAB, assigned male at birth, and equated it with cis male. So it basically equated trans women with cis males, basically saying that, to be participating in these discussions are definitely not to be centered. And they were treating me, again, like I was illegitimately become some kind of celebrity, and I didn't think I was a celebrity at all. I still don't really, not by any normal definition. I'm still a struggling writer. I don't make a shit ton of money. I barely get by. I pretty much live paycheck to paycheck, which is scary when you're not always sure when you're going to get the paychecks or which paychecks you're going to get this month, because I don't have exactly regular work. I am making it as a writer and speaker. I recognize I have a lot of privilege to be able to do that. And I recognize that I grew up with a lot of privilege anyway, just because of how I was perceived. So I wouldn't deny any of that. But they went nuclear on me. And so then when I came out as a trans woman to expose their transphobia and just try to make this stop, suddenly they had one of the people on their side say that someone had called this person's place of work and outed them as non-binary. And we're trying to insinuate that it was me. And honestly, I don't even think it happened. I think this is just full Darvo from these people who just, went off the deep end. I know from screenshots that people showed me that Sam Field was lying about me behind my back, giving completely contradictory accounts of what had happened to different people in direct messages. So, in theory, well, they were both distorted accounts, but in theory, one of them could be true, but they both could not be true. So Sam Field is a liar. But what are you going to do?
Well, those kinds of narcissistic mind games are par for the course when it comes to this whole community. My mother actually is a textbook narcissist on top of that. Your father's story gives me a little hope, though. My parents have done the reverse. They've gotten more conservative and more evangelical than even when I was growing up. And I'm like, oh my God, I dodged that bullet. They're just way off the deep end compared to where, when I was in high school. So do you think there's any hope for evangelicals, or we just need to keep them out of power?
Mostly we just need to keep them out of power. As a demographic, no, there's no scalable way to reach them. One-on-one, sometimes maybe love and family actually triumph over all that indoctrination and fear mongering, but probably in more cases than not, they don't. And when that does happen, it usually takes years of patience, and it's based on a connection that you already have with them that isn't based on, the only reason you are connected to them at all is because you want to change their mind. That never
Right.
works. Of course, they
No.
think it works though because they try to do friendship evangelism with everybody. But yeah,
Well, it's like your existence, not just your existence, but you're having a contrary thought is like this huge impediment to them, like they
mm-hmm.
have to, they
It's a
have to,
massive threat to them.
yes.
It just scares them to death.
Oh gosh.
It's
Yeah.
not rational, but it's how they're socialized.
Yeah. And that's really strong. That's really strong. In fact, I'm 51. I've spent a lot of years working through my shit. And it still comes up, when you're
Yeah, yeah.
used to all those mind games and stuff, and particularly once you have children, because we have children, and it's like you have to revisit all of that again, to make sure that you're being a healthy parent instead of a crazy one.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever will be a parent. The ship may have sailed for me, but I do like kids, and I wish I could be more involved in my nieces' lives. But yeah, I mean, even if you don't have kids, you still have to revisit a lot of this stuff and work through it to get to a place where you can kind of hold it at enough distance to really be able to talk about it publicly and try to do this kind of work, I think, effectively. And I do hope that a lot of the folks who attacked me will eventually get to that place. And they're just not. I mean, they're all 20 somethings. And I think a lot of them are not in the greatest life circumstances. And, I hope they get the help that they need. But at the same time, I'm like, these little 20-year-old shits are coming after me trying to destroy my life when I'm like in my late 30s, and it's not helpful.
No, it's not helpful. And it seems like nowadays, transgender people in particular are demonized way worse than even your average, gay and lesbian person. The rhetoric is just insane.
Yeah, I mean, I don't try to make any of these things a contest, but the whole men in dresses sneaking into bathrooms thing is not fun.
I remember somebody I was used to be friends with on Facebook posted, I don't want my daughters to see a penis for the first time in the women's room. And I'm like, honey, if your daughters see a penis in the women's room, it's because they're peeking. She defriended me.
Yeah, well, yeah. Or, because they sneaked in there with their boyfriend. I mean, how many people's genitalia have you seen in public restrooms? I don't think, well, okay, I've caught a few glimpses at urinals, which are disgusting anyway, but that's a different thing. I mean, when you're in a stall, right? So.
Exactly. And you don't see anything. I don't know what you're on about. Anyway. Oh, Lordy. Thanks for keeping up the good fight, Chrissy. I really appreciate you coming on my podcast.
Thank you, Asha. It's great chatting with you. I appreciate the invitation.
Oh, it's great to see you in person.
Yeah, nice to connect with you in person too, and hopefully we'll actually do it face to face, given that we're both in the Portland, Oregon area once we can get past all this COVID bullshit.
Oh, let us hope. Let us hope. I would like that.
Well, I heard they started vaccinating people in Britain just today.
Yeah, they did. And apparently the United States didn't buy nearly as many shots as they could have.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? It is what it is, right?
It is what it is.
Oh, well, thank you again. And
yeah.
Take care of yourself.
You take care too. Bye.